The floor of Terrance Webb's garage had a crack running from the northeast corner all the way to the drain in the middle, and he had memorized every inch of it. He was 23 years old. The garage was a single-bay operation on the edge of Odessa, Texas, the kind of place that sat between a closed-down feed store and a chain-link fence with no purpose. The sign out front said WEB Auto and Sickle Repair, which was technically true, though most days it was just Terrance, a rolling stool, and whatever broke-down machine someone had towed in or pushed through the door. His father had run the shop before him. His father was gone now, 7 months in a grave out on Route 20, and the mortgage on the building had become Terrance's problem the same week the funeral flowers went dry. He was good at what he did. Better than good if you asked the few regulars who kept coming back. His hands had a kind of instinct that couldn't be taught, the way a surgeon knows where to cut before he opens the patient. Terrance could hear a knock in an engine and name the cause before he touched a wrench. He could feel vibration through a frame and tell you whether the metal was fatigued or simply cold. He had learned most of it from his father, and the rest he had figured out on his own, lying on concrete at 2 in the morning with a flashlight and no one to ask. The problem was that being good at fixing things doesn't pay the light bill when no one knows you exist. He was 3 weeks behind on the shop's electric. He had a personal tab at the parts supplier on 5th Street that was growing faster than he could knock it down. And on the Tuesday morning in early October, when the noise came from outside, the kind of noise that starts as a low vibration and becomes something you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. He had exactly $41 in his wallet and a transmission job that wasn't going to pay out until Friday. He stepped to the bay door. There were 2 of them, a man on a road-worn Harley Softail and a second rider following close behind on a newer street glide. They pulled into the lot without calling ahead. The first man cut his engine and sat for a moment without dismounting, which was the kind of move that told you something about a person. He was not in a hurry. He was looking at the shop with the specific patience of someone who had already decided something and was only now letting the world catch up. His name was Raymond Patch Corey. He was 56 years old, and he wore his years the way old leather wears its creases, not badly, just honestly. He was the road captain of the Permian Basin chapter of the Iron Verdict MC, which was not the largest club in West Texas, but was among the most respected, and respected in the particular way that comes not from fear but from consistency. Patch had been with the club for 28 years. He had buried 3 brothers and ridden to the funerals of men he'd never met because that was what you did. He did not raise his voice often. He did not need to. The second rider was a younger man named Lyle, who stayed on his bike and said nothing. Patch climbed off, stretched his back with the caution of a man who had learned the hard way what happens when you stop respecting your own limits, and walked to the bay door. "You the owner?" he said. "I am," Terrance said. Patch looked at him for a moment in the evaluating way that older men sometimes look at younger ones. Not dismissive, just measuring. "Someone told me you know Harleys. I know most things with an engine. This one's specific." Patch turned and nodded toward the Softail. "Had 3 shops look at her. 2 said they couldn't find the problem. 1 said he found it and charged me $400, and it came back 2 weeks later." Terrance walked out to the bike. He didn't touch it yet, just looked. It was a 2009 Heritage Softail Classic, candy apple red with cream paneling, pinstriped by hand along the tank. Somebody had loved this machine. The chrome was maintained, the leather was conditioned, but there was something in the way it sat, a weight distribution that wasn't quite right, a subtle lean that the stand didn't fully explain. "What's she doing?" Terrance asked. "Vibration at highway speed, 65-70. Below that, nothing. Above that, she smooths back out. But right in that window," Patch paused. "You feel it in your wrists. After a couple hours, it starts climbing up your arms." Terrance crouched and looked at the front wheel, then the rear. He ran his hand along the frame near the neck, slowly the way you'd lay a palm on someone's forehead to check for fever. "Leave her with me," he said. Patch studied him. "How long?" "Give me until tomorrow evening." Patch looked at the shop again, the crack in the concrete visible from the doorway. The second-hand lift, the single bare bulb in the corner that had been flickering for 3 weeks, because Terrance hadn't gotten to replacing it. "You going to tell me your rates?" Patch asked. Terrance told him. Patch nodded, not impressed, not disappointed. He reached into his cut, pulled out a card with a phone number handwritten on it, and set it on the workbench just inside the bay. Then he and Lyle rode out of the lot, and Terrance was alone again, with the Softail and the crack in his floor and the $41 in his wallet. He started with the obvious. Tire balance was fine. Wheel bearings were fine. He pulled the wheels and inspected them. No warping, no damage. He checked the belt drive, the pulleys, the motor mounts. Everything looked right, which meant the problem was somewhere that didn't show itself until you looked at the things that connected other things. He found it late that afternoon. It was in the neck of the frame, the steering head where the forks meet the main tube. There was a crack in the weld, barely visible without a light held at the right angle, running along the lower seam of the gusset plate. Not a fatigue crack, not a stress fracture from age or mileage. Terrance had seen enough of those to know the difference. This one had a pattern. The bead around it was inconsistent in a specific way. The penetration was uneven on purpose, not from carelessness. Someone had laid a partial weld over a clean joint to make it look repaired while leaving the structural failure intact. He sat back on his stool and looked at it for a long time. Someone had sabotaged this bike, not vandalized it, not damaged it out of anger. Sabotaged it, deliberately, carefully, with the knowledge that a frame failure at highway speed might look like an accident, might look like the rider simply lost control, might look like the road. Terrance thought about the man who had walked into his lot that morning, 56 years old, road captain, a man who spent long hours at highway speed. He thought about the $400 another shop had already charged. He thought about whether whoever did that weld had done it on purpose, or whether Patch had taken it somewhere else before that, somewhere the original sabotage had been performed. He pulled out his phone and looked at the number on the card for a while before he dialed it. Patch answered on the second ring. "I need you to come back to the shop," Terrance said. "Tonight, if you can." There was a pause. "You find something?" "Yes." "Good or bad?" Terrance looked at the crack in the weld, at the clean line of deliberate deception, at the machine that had been carrying a man down highways at 70 miles an hour without him knowing what was underneath him. "I'd rather show you in person," he said. Patch arrived at 7:15. He came alone this time, which Terrance hadn't expected, and he came without the softail. Lyle had trailered it back to the shop earlier that afternoon, and it was still on the lift where Terrance had left it. Terrance showed him without preamble. He positioned the light the right way, angled the mirror, and let Patch look for himself. He did not explain first. He let the man see it. Patch looked for a long time. Then he straightened up. "Walk me through what I'm looking at," he said. Terrance explained it. The weld pattern, the penetration depth, the difference between a fatigue fracture and a structural compromise of this kind. He spoke plainly without softening it or inflating it, because the truth didn't need decoration. When he finished, Patch was quiet for a moment. "The shop on Crane Road," he said. "That's where I took her 2 months ago. The other 3 were after that." Terrance didn't say anything. "You're telling me someone at that shop did this?" "I'm telling you what I found," Terrance said. "What it means, that's your business, not mine." Patch looked at the weld again. Something moved across his face that Terrance couldn't fully read. It wasn't quite anger and it wasn't quite grief, but it carried weight from both directions. "Can you fix it?" Patch said. "Yes. I'll need to cut out the gusset plate, re-prep the joint, lay a proper bead. It'll be right when I'm done." "How long I can have it done by noon tomorrow?" "I won't rush it." Patch nodded once. Then he looked at Terrance in a way that was different from how he'd looked at him that morning. Not measuring anymore, but something closer to recognition. Like he had asked a question earlier in the day without speaking it out loud, and Terrance had just answered it. "How old are you?" Patch said. 23. Patch made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You've been doing this long?" "My whole life, basically." Patch looked around the shop, the flickering bulb, the bare concrete, the one lift, the one stool, the single bay that smelled of oil and metal and effort. "Your father's place?" Patch said. Terrance looked at him. "The deed on this building is listed under a Clifton Webb," Patch said. "I looked it up before I came the first time. I do that." "He passed in March," Terrance said. Patch said nothing for a moment, then, "I'm sorry, thank you." There was a pause between them that was not uncomfortable. "I'll be back at noon," Patch said. He turned toward the door, then stopped. "The man who runs the shop on Crane Road. His name is Dennis Pruitt." Terrance waited. "He knew my father," Patch said. "Old business. I'll handle it." He walked out. The sound of his truck faded on the highway, and then it was just Terrance again, and the crack in the floor and the softail on the lift, and the work that still needed doing. He didn't sleep much that night. He worked. He cut out the compromised section of the gusset plate with careful passes of the angle grinder, taking nothing more than what needed to go. He cleaned the joint down to bare metal. He measured twice, set up his TIG welder, and ran a bead that was as clean as anything he'd ever laid. A proper root pass, a fill, a cap, each one allowed to cool properly before the next. He did it the way his father had taught him, which was the same way his father's teacher had taught his father. Slow, patient, without ego. By 4 in the morning, the repair was done. By 6, he had inspected it, pressure tested the joint as best he could in a single bay shop, and verified the geometry of the neck against the spec. By 8, he was sitting on the concrete floor with his back against the lift, drinking coffee from a thermos, looking at the bike the way you look at something when you're waiting to find a reason to doubt yourself and can't find one. He found the other thing at 9:30. He hadn't been looking for it. He was doing a final walk around, partly habit and partly the particular anxiety of a man who understands that the thing you miss is always the thing you weren't looking for. He was checking the brake lines, running his fingers along the rear line from the caliper to the junction, when he felt it. A section of line that was slightly softer than it should be, the rubber just beginning to separate from the inner braid. Not a failure yet. A few months out, maybe less, depending on heat cycles. The brake line had been cut most of the way through and rewrapped with electrical tape in a color that matched the original sleeve. Terrance stood up and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he sat back down and replaced both brake lines, front and rear. He used his own parts and wrote up a note explaining exactly what he'd found and where. He did not charge Patch for the parts. He did not decide whether that was wise or not. He just did it because it was what needed doing. Patch arrived at 11:47. He walked in, looked at the bike on the floor, and then looked at Terrance. "She's done," Terrance said. He handed Patch the written note before he said anything else. He waited while Patch read it. He watched the man's face go through several things in sequence. First stillness, then something harder beneath the stillness, then slowly, a kind of deliberate calm that looked like a choice being made in real time. Patch set the note on the workbench. "How long have you known about the brake line?" he said. "Found it this morning. You could have called me. I wanted to fix it first," Terrance said. "Didn't seem right to tell you about a problem and hand it back to you unsolved." Patch looked at him for a long time. "The shop on Crane Road," Patch said. "Pruitt. He also did brake work on this bike 8 weeks ago." Terrance did not say anything. "Two things," Patch said. "Same bike, same man." He paused. "You understand what I'm telling you?" "I think so. I'm going to ask you a direct question and I want a direct answer." "All right. Did you know what you were walking into when I brought this bike to you?" "No," Terrance said. "I knew it needed work, that's all." Patch nodded slowly. "And you fixed both things. Told me about both things. Didn't charge me for the brake line. The brake line was part of the job. A lot of men would have looked the other way." Terrance looked at the floor, at the crack running to the drain. "My father didn't raise me to look the other way." Another long silence. "What do I owe you?" Patch said. Terrance handed him the invoice. It was fair, probably on the low end of fair, and it covered the frame repair, the labor, and the consumables. Patch looked at it, then set it back down and wrote a check for nearly double the amount without commenting on the difference. "That's too much," Terrance said. "It's what it's worth," Patch said. Terrance looked at the check. He thought about the electric bill, about the tab at the parts supplier, about the mortgage payment that was due in 11 days. He took the check. "One more thing," Patch said. He had been moving toward the door, but he stopped and turned back. "I'm going to make some calls tonight. There are about 260 men in this region who ride with affiliated clubs, and most of them have machines that need work, and most of them don't have a shop they fully trust. That might change." Terrance didn't know what to say to that. "Don't thank me," Patch said. "I'm not doing you a favor. I'm correcting something that should have been corrected a long time ago, which is that the best mechanic in the Permian Basin is operating out of a one-bay shop with a busted light bulb because no one told the right people he was here." He walked out. The Softail started on the first kick. Terrance listened to it idle in the lot, clean, steady, no vibration, and then Patch let it warm for a moment before he eased out onto the road and was gone. 4 days passed. Then on Saturday morning, at 20 minutes past 9, Terrance heard the noise again. That low frequency that arrives in the chest before it arrives in the ears. He stepped to the bay door. They came from the south on the state highway and turned into his lot in a column. Not a crowd, not a mob, but a formation, organized and unhurried, the way serious men move when they have decided where they are going. They filled the lot and spilled into the shoulder of the road and kept coming. Terrance counted without meaning to. He lost count somewhere past 180 and stopped trying. They cut their engines almost in unison and in the silence that followed. The particular silence of 200 machines going quiet in the same moment. Terrance heard his own heartbeat. Patch was at the front. He rode in last and parked at the center of the lot and took his time climbing off. He was wearing a different cut than the day he had come in. A cleaner one, with the road captain patch showing clearly. He walked to the bay door and stood in front of Terrance, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "These men need mechanics they can trust," Patch said. "I told them there was one here." He handed Terrance an envelope. Inside was a list of names and phone numbers, organized by chapter with small notations next to each, the make and model of the machine, and 1 or 2 words describing the issue. There were 241 entries. "I didn't ask them to come today," Patch said. "That part was their idea." Terrance looked out at the lot, at the column of men sitting on their machines in the October morning light, watching him without expression, the way serious people watch when they are paying attention. None of them spoke. Some of them nodded when he looked at them. One old man in the back raised 2 fingers off his handlebar in the way bikers acknowledge each other on the road, and then put his hand back down. Terrance thought about his father, about the crack in the floor and the busted light bulb and the $41, about the brake line wrapped in matching tape, about all the ways the world finds to bury what is honest and sustain what is corrupt, and how the only thing that resists that, the only thing that ever resists that, is people who refuse to look the other way. He didn't say a speech. He didn't say much at all. "Tell the first one to bring his bike around," Terrance said. Patch turned to the column and raised one hand. The engines did not start. They came forward on their machines in silence, rolling slowly through the lot toward the bay, and the morning light caught the chrome and threw it back in pieces, and the line stretched all the way to the road and beyond, and Terrance Webb went back inside to work.